everyone and welcome to another Stargate lore video. Today we're going to be talking about Setesh.
Let no other gods draw you away from Seth.
Seth is life. Seth is happiness. Seth is almighty.
History. So, Setesh's history is a little complicated because we technically have two different origins. But at the same time, they could be the same. It's confusing and complicated, so let me explain. We know his history started around several thousand years ago during the Second Ghoul Dynasty. In the show, we were only ever given tidbits about him. We know he imprisoned his brother Osiris and his mate Isis in stasis jars. We know he had a price on his head because he attempted to overthrow Ra, and we know the reason he stayed on Earth was to hide from both the System Lords and the Tok'ra. The Living Gods RPG book adds some details about him, but it kind of conflicts with what was stated in the show, but let's get into what the book says. So the RPG book actually explains why Setesh imprisoned Osiris and Isis. Osiris had decided to set up shop on Earth, ruling over a vast area of the planet from Egypt with his mate Isis, which, just as a side note, from what I could tell, it seems Isis was the one wearing pants in the relationship, if you get my meaning. Getting back to Osiris, he would teach the humans the basics of civilization, farming, religion, and rituals. He did this as a way to domesticate and ensure obedience in the humans, and to install fear in them and their future generations. However, Setesh felt that humans should not be taught civilization as he feared they would be too dangerous. We'll just ignore the fact that other Goa'uld were doing literally the exact same thing, so I don't really know why he signaled out his brother. Setesh felt the best way to deal with this would be to scheme of a way to dethrone his brother and claim his empire as his own. Ah, there it is. Setesh convinced Osiris and Isis that the three of them could dethrone Ra, and soon the three of them set their plans into motion. But at the last possible moment, Setesh betrayed the others and revealed the plan to Ra. Isis and Osiris tried to hide in Keb, but eventually they were captured by Ra, stripped of their host, and placed in stasis jars to be imprisoned for all eternity. And they were never seen again. So the first conflict here is, why was there a price on his head if he discovered this plot and revealed it to Ra, especially when he was given a reward afterwards in the form of the stasis jars? Now, we could logically surmise that Ra later found out what Setesh had done, and that's where the bounty comes from. But Setesh never really planned to overthrow Ra. He did this all as a way to overthrow his brother. So wouldn't the bounty be for betraying another System Lord? Another conflict is why he stayed on Earth. In the show, it was stated that he stayed on Earth to hide out from his enemies. But according to the RPG book, Setesh did make an honest attempt to leave. He even abandoned the stasis jars containing Osiris and Isis in an attempt to reach the Stargate before it was buried. But he was ultimately too late and forced to live in secret on Earth. Now, I should note that the idea that Setesh was hiding out on Earth to hide from his enemies was just a theory from the Tok'ra. It was never stated by Setesh. So it is possible that Setesh did just get stuck on Earth. But at the same time, there's no evidence saying that was the reason. Again, it's weird that you can kind of weave these two together to kind of explain one another, but at the same time, they also don't make any sense together. Thankfully, Setesh's life story gets a bit more clear after this. After the Goa'uld left, Setesh would spend most of his time on Earth roaming around and forming various cults to worship him. I'll get more into his various cults later in the video, but just keep in mind the cults would usually end with everyone dying. In 1999, the Tok'ra decided to make a census of every System Lord in the Goa'uld Empire, what they were doing, what their strengths are, and where they were located in the galaxy. They had accounted for everyone except Setesh, who, when they looked through the records, found his last known location was on Earth. The Tok'ra informed the SGC of the possibility that Setesh was still on Earth. Daniel was able to find him by tracking him through his various cults and FBI database, where they found he had set up a new cult just north of Seattle. SG-1, with the assistance of Salmac/Jacob and the ATF, planned to infiltrate the cult, as any direct attack would end in slaughter. Since Setesh used a mind control compound called Nishta to control members of the cult, SG-1, minus Teal'c, allow themselves to be captured and placed under mind control, but with an earpiece that will give them a shock, breaking the control. They help break control of the other cult members and help them escape. Setesh attempted to blend in with his followers and escape as well, but was found out and kind of brutally killed by Sam. And this was the end of Setesh. Personality. So Setesh doesn't really have a lot of personality to him. He kind of has the core traits that most Goa'uld have. He's arrogant, he's egotistical, he's pretty much evil.
You're a narcissist? You're a sociopath? You're probably a psychopath. You're paranoid, sexist, and you make fun of the elderly. Those are just quirks!
Though there are 3 interesting things I did find about him personality-wise. If we go only by the RPG book, him creating only cults and not kingdoms is kind of interesting, as it shows that he felt humans shouldn't have access to basic civilization, so him not doing it could line up with that. The second thing about him personality-wise is I think it shows Setesh isn't very smart. In all his time on Earth, Setesh could have done anything with his knowledge of advanced technology to accumulate power and wealth. Just look at what Baal did when the Goa'uld Empire collapsed and he went into exile on Earth. He set himself up as a wealthy businessman. He could pretty much live life as much as he want with little suspicion. Setesh very easily could have done the exact same thing. Yes, he was trying to hide, but there's a way he could have become powerful and wealthy and not be in the public eye. But instead of doing that, all Setesh would do is create these cults that would exist for a few years on the fringe of society before they were wiped out by the rest of society, and all he'd do is just move on and do the same thing over, and over, and over. My final observation about him personality-wise, while it does pertain to his personality, I think you could also expand it to talk about the Goa'uld as a species, and specifically how evil they are. Getting back to Setesh, while he was in exile on Earth, he ruined the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of people. He would indoctrinate them into his cult, which he knew was false because he is not a god, completely upending their lives and more or less making them slaves for himself, and often just ended up getting them all killed while he moved on to do it all again. Why did he do this? Because he desired power, and that's enough for him. I'm not saying Setesh had to become some good guy Goa'uld uplifting humanity with his knowledge, but he didn't have to go around ruining people's lives the way he did. And like I said, you can expand this to the Goa'uld as a whole, because that's basically how their empire works. And again, I think it just shows how evil he and the Goa'uld are as a whole. Cult of Setesh. So, because Setesh didn't really have any domains, instead let's look at the cult he created. Or the cults, I should say. The cult of Setesh existed in many forms since Setesh's exile on Earth. The earliest we know about was in Greece when he took the name Typhon. The number of members of the cult can range as large as 300, as it was in Greece, to as small as 50 in his most recent cult. With the modern cult, we know he controlled all its members through the use of a biological compound called Nishta, which is described as some sort of smart virus. When absorbed into the body's tissues, it would leave the subject's mind extremely pliable and open to suggestion. However, an electrical shock would kill the organism, and once free, the subject could never be reinfected. The cult's members were traditionally split up into 3 parts, 2 parts for the men and 1 part for the women. The women became part of a harem that tended to Setesh's every needs and presumably all his wants. Some of the men would be made into guards or warriors to defend the cult. As a side note, I have no idea where Setesh is getting all this Goa'uld weaponry and technology. If he's making it, or he just had stockpiles stashed in various places over the earth, I can't really say. I assume the latter, since that would make more sense. The rest of the men would be part of his court as eunuchs, and if you don't know what those are, well, By the by, this just occurred to me. Half these guys walking down the corridor are going to take those robes off and find some very disturbing new reality they live in. And that was Setesh. I pretty much said all my thoughts about him in the personality section, so as a final thing I'll say this. As a fan of mythology, I kind of find him disappointing. So Setesh, or Set in Egyptian mythology, is the god of deserts, storms, disorder, violence, and foreigners, and is usually portrayed in modern media as the god of evil or villainy, with some justified reasons if you know anything about Set's mythology. So for him to be a one-off villain feels kind of weird and disappointing, especially when the show made Sokar such a big threat. But from what I can gather, Sokar is actually a minor god. Even the whole him being the original devil thing seems kind of odd. Yes, Sokar in mythology was in charge of punishing people, but it seems specific to evildoers. And he was the god of other things. For example, he was a god of agriculture and a craftsman deity. Again, it just seems weird to have a god of evil to be a one-off character, but a minor god like Sokar being to such a big threat. Especially since Set and Lucifer, in my opinion, have very similar stories to one another. Both started out as well-liked members of their respective religions until they did something in a bid to take power and became vilified for all of time. To be clear, this doesn't ruin the show for me, but it's just something I thought of while writing this script. But what do you all think? Would you have liked to see Setesh have a bigger role? Or do you like him as this one-off villain for SG-1 to fight? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below and maybe leave a like and subscribe. And remember, we do have a Reddit page, so you can go and post stuff on there if you want. Until next time, everyone, and remember...
A serpent guard, a horse guard, and a Setesh guard meet on a neutral planet. It is a tense moment. The serpent guard's eyes glow. The horse guard's beak glistens. The Setesh guard's nose drips.